Hare Krishna, good evening.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So, you able to hear me well?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay, then let's begin. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jnana Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kathamahim Dadati Swapatantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Dapadakaman Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajadam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sachivam Sadvaitam सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपदान् सहगणललित श्रीविशाख अन्वितांश्च नमं विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नाम्ने नमस्ते सारस्वतीदेवे गौरवाणी प्रचारणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतरणे वञ्चाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौर भक्त वृंद हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे. Reading from Srila Prabhupada-līlāmṛta Volume 1, Chapter 15. It will not be possible to assist you. I have come here in this old age neither for sightseeing nor for any personal interest. It is for the interest of the entire humanity that I am trying to implement the science of Krishna, which will actually make them happy. So it is the duty of every devotee of Lord Krishna to help me by all means. From a letter to Sumati Morarji. November passed and December came, and Prabhupada, having obtained an extension on his visa, stayed on. America seemed so opulent, yet many things were difficult to tolerate. The sirens and the bells from the fire engines and the police cars seemed like they would crack his heart. Sometimes at night he would hear a person being attacked and crying for help. From his first days in the city, he had noted that the smell of dog stool was everywhere, and although it was such a rich city, he could rarely find a mango to purchase, and if he did, it was very expensive and usually had no taste. From his room, he would sometimes hear the horns of ocean liners, and he would dream that some day he would he would sail around the world with a Sankirtan party preaching in all major cities of the world. The weather went below freezing, colder than he had ever experienced in India. Daily he had to walk toward the Hudson against a west wind that even on an ordinary winter's day would take your breath away and make your eyes water and your face grow numb. On a stormy day, the driving wind and sudden gusts of could even knock a man down. Sometimes a cold rain would turn the streets slick with ice. The cold would become especially severe as one approached the shelterless, windswept area of West Side Drive, where occasional whirlwinds carried brown leaves and paper trash mysteriously high into the air. Srila Prabhupada wore a coat Dr. Mishra had given him, but he never gave up wearing his dhoti despite the cold, windy walks. Swami Nikhilananda of Ramakrishna Mission had advised Prabhupada that if he wanted to stay in the West, he should abandon his traditional Indian dress and strict vegetarianism. Meat eating and liquor, as well as pants and coat, were almost a necessity in this climate, he had said. Before Prabhupada had left India, one of his godbrothers had demonstrated to him how he should eat in the West with a knife and fork, but Prabhupada never considered taking on the Western ways. His advisors cautioned him not to remain an alien but to give in to the spirit of American life, even if it meant breaking oaths he had held in um, India. Almost all Indian immigrants compromised their old ways, but Prabhupada's idea was different, and he could not be budged. The others may have had to compromise, he thought, but they had come to beg technological knowledge from the West. I have not come to beg something, he said, but to give something. In his solitary wanderings, Srila Prabhupada made acquaintance with a number of local people. There was Mr. Rubin, a Turkish Jew who worked as a New York City subway conductor. Mr. Rubin met Prabhupada on a park bench and, being a sociable fellow and a world traveler, sat and talked with the Indian holy man. Mr. Rubin. He seemed to know that he would have temples filled up with devotees. He would look out and say, I am not a poor man, I am rich. There are temples and books, they are existing, they are there, but the time is separating us from them. He always mentioned we and spoke about the one who sent him, his spiritual master. He didn't know people at that time, but he said, I am never alone. He always looked like a lonely man to me. That's what made me think of him like a holy man, Elijah, who always went out alone. I don't believe he had any followers. When the weather was not rainy or icy, Prabhupada would catch the bus to Grand Central Station and visit the Central Library on 42nd Street. His Srimad Bhagavatams were there, some of the same volumes he had sold to the US Embassy in New Delhi, and he took pleasure in seeing them listed in the card catalogue and learning that they were being regularly checked out and read. He would sometimes walk through an UN Plaza or walk up to New Delhi House on 64th Street, where he had met Mr. Malhotra, a consultant officer, a consulate officer. It was through Mr. Malhotra that he had contacted the Tagore Society and had secured an invitation to lecture before one of their meetings back in November. Riding the bus down Fifth Avenue, he would look out at the buildings and imagine that someday they could be used in Krishna consciousness. He would take a special interest in certain buildings, one on 23rd Street and one with a dome on 14th Street attracted his attention. He would think of how the materialist had constructed such elaborate buildings and had yet made no provisions for spiritual life. Despite all the great achievements of technology, the people felt empty and useless. They had built these great buildings, but the children were going to LSD. December 2. New York Times headlines. New York City hospitals report marked rise in LSD cases admitted for care. Protest against US participation in Vietnam War mounts. The weather grew cold, but there was no snow in December. On Columbus Avenue, shops were selling Christmas trees and the continental restaurants were bright with holiday lighting. On 72nd, the Retailers Association erected tall red poles topped with green tinsel Christmas trees. The tops of the trees on the both sides of the street sprouted tinsel garlands that spanned the street and joined in red tinsel stars surrounded by colored lights. Although Srila Prabhupada did no Christmas shopping, he visited many bookstores, Orientalia, Sam Weiser's, Doubleday, The Paragon, and others, trying to sell his Srimad Bhagavatams. Mrs. Ferber, the wife of Paragon Book Gallery proprietor, considered Prabhupada a pleasant and extremely polite small gentleman. The first time he called, she wasn't interested in his books, but he tried again, and she took several volumes. Prabhupada used to stop by about once a week, and since his books were selling regularly, he would collect. Sometimes, when he needed copies to sell personally, he would come by and pick them up from Mrs. Ferber, and sometimes he would phone to ask her how his books were selling. Mrs. Ferber. Every time he came, he would ask for a glass of water. If a customer would make such a request, I would ordinarily say, there is water cooler. But because he was an old man, I couldn't tell him that, of course. He was very polite always, very modest, and a great scholar. So whenever he would ask, I would fetch him a cup of water personally. Once Prabhupada was talking with Mrs. Faber about Indian cuisine, and she mentioned that she especially liked samosas. The next time he paid her a visit, he brought a tray of samosas which she enjoyed. Harvey Cohen. came often to room 501 to visit the Swami who had so impressed him at Ananda Ashram, Harvey. The room he occupied was a tiny office in the back of Yoga Society in uptown Manhattan. I began to go there regularly, and we sat facing each other on the floor in this little office with his typewriter and a new tape recorder on the top of two suitcases. And there was a box of books he had brought from India and a color reproduction of dancing figures which he looked at often. I told Swami Bhaktivedanta that I was an artist and he asked me to please paint the picture of the dancers, which he explained was of Lord Chaitanya and his disciples. The painting was called Sankirtana. Whenever I came to visit him, Swami would always be happy to see me. I told him about myself and we chanted Hare Krishna together in his room many nights that winter. I would get the train uptown from my apartment to go see him. January 11, 1966. Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri died of a heart attack while visiting Russia. The Prime Minister had been a personal acquaintance of Srila Prabhupada's in India and an admirer of his Srimad Bhagavatam translation. He had been scheduled to visit America and Prabhupada had expected to obtain a personal sanction from him for the release of funds from India. His untimely death was a great upset in Srila Prabhupada's plan to purchase the building at 143 West 2nd, 72nd Street. The realtors had shown him the building, and he had already mentally designed the interior for deity worship and distribution of prasadam. The money was to come from India, and Prime Minister Shastri was to give personal sanction for release of funds, but suddenly that was all changed. January 14, Prabhupada decided to write to the owner of the building, Mr. A.M. Hartman. He explained how his plans had been upset and he posed a new plan. Now the Prime Minister, Mr. Lal Bahadur Shastri, is suddenly dead, and I am greatly perplexed. As there is now great difficulty for getting money from India, I am requesting you to allow me to use the place for the International Institute for God Consciousness at least for some time. The house is lying vacant for so many days without any use, and I learn it that you are paying the taxes, insurances, and other charges for the house, although you have no income from there. If you, however, allow this place for this public institution, you shall at least save the taxes and other charges which you are paying now for nothing. If I can start the institution immediately, certainly I shall be able to get sympathy locally, and in that case, I may not be required to get money from India. I am also requesting that Your Honor become one of the directors of this public institution because you will give a place to start the institution. A.M. Hartman wasn't interested. On the same day he wrote Mr. Hartman, Prabhupada received a letter from Sir Padampat Singhania, the director of very large JK organization in India. Prabhupada had written Sir Padampatji for financial support and his reply gave him hope. Not only was Singhania family fabulously wealthy, but its members were devotees of Lord Krishna. My dear Swamiji, I have gone through your letter. I am very glad to note your idea of erecting a Sri Radha Krishna temple in New York. I think the proposal is a good one, but the following are the difficulties. We have got to send foreign exchange for building the temple, for which government sanction is required. Without the government sanction, no money can be sent abroad. If the government of India agrees, then one can think of erecting the temple in New York. 2. I doubt whether with this small amount of rupees 7 lakh, which is $110,000, a temple can be built in New York. I mean to carry out a nice construction with Indian type of architecture. To get a temple completed in Indian style of architecture, we have to send a man from India. These are the two main difficulties, otherwise, your idea is very good. Srila Prabhupada and Mr. Singhania had a basic disagreement. A magnificent Indian temple in New York would cost many millions of dollars to construct. Prabhupada knew, of course, that if Padampat Singhania wanted, he could provide millions of dollars. But then, how would they get so much money out of India? Prabhupada therefore again suggested that they spend only 7 lakh. After purchasing the house, he wrote, "We can build another story upon it with a temple dome, chakra, etc." Prabhupada had his own line of reasoning. Lord Dwarakadish exhibited his opulences at Dwarka with 16,000 queens, and it is understood that he built a palace for each and every queen. And the palaces were made with jewels and stones so that there was no necessity for artificial light in the palaces. So, your conception of building a temple of Lord Krishna is in opulence. But we are residents of Vrindavan, and Vrindavan has no palaces like your Dwaraka. Vrindavan is full of forests and cows on the bank of the Jamuna, and Lord Krishna in his childhood played the part of a cowherd boy without any royal opulence as you people, the inhabitants of Dwaraka, are accustomed. So, when the Dwaraka Valas meet the Vrindavan Valas, there may be a via medium. With Mr. Padampat's Dwaraka like wealth and Srila Prabhupada's Vrindavan like devotion, Lord Krishna, the Lord of both Vrindavan and Dwarka, could be properly worshipped. January 21, he received Bon Maharaj's reply. 2 weeks before, Prabhupada had written to his godbrother, the director of Institute of Oriental Philosophy in Vrindavan, that he had found a place for a temple in New York and that he wanted to install deities of Radha and Krishna. In his reply, Bon Maharaj quoted price estimates for 14-inch brass deities of Radha Krishna, but he also warned that to begin deity worship would be a heavy responsibility. Srila Prabhupada responded, "I think that after the temple has started, some men, even from America, may be available, as I see they have at Ramakrishna Mission as well as in so many yoga societies. So I am trying to open a temple here because Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Saraswati wanted it." Prabhupada also requested Bon Maharaj's assistance in getting the government to sanction release of money he felt Padampat Singhania would donate. He mentioned that he had carried on an extensive personal correspondence with the Vice President of India, Dr. Radhakrishnan, who was also known to Bon Maharaj. Tell him that it is not an ordinary temple of worship but an international institution for God consciousness based on the Srimad Bhagavatam. While Srila Prabhupada prayed to receive Radhakrishna in New York, a snowstorm hit the city. That morning, Srila Prabhupada, who had perhaps never before seen snow, woke and thought that someone had whitewashed the side of building next door. Not until he went outside did he discover that it was snow. The temperature was 10 degrees. The city went into a state of emergency, but Prabhupada continued his daily works. Now he had to walk through heavy snow, only a thin dhoti beneath his overcoat, his head covered with his Swami hat. The main roads were cleared, but many sidewalks were covered with snow. Along the strip of parked, dividing Broadway, the gusting winds piled snowbanks to shoulder height and buried the benches. The Broadway kiosks, plastered with layers of posters and notices, were now plastered with additional layer of snow and ice. But despite the weather, New Yorkers still walked their dogs, the pets now wearing raincoats and mackinaws. Such pampering by American dog owners left Prabhupada with a feeling of surprised amusement. As he approached West End Avenue, he found the doormen blowing whistles to signal taxis as usual, but also scattering salt to melt the ice and create safe sidewalks in front of the buildings. In Riverside Park, the benches, pathways, and trees were glazed with ice and uh, gave off a shimmering reflection from the sky. In the news, Selective Service officials announced the first substantial increase in the draft since the Korean War. A month long peace ended with the US Army Force bombing North Vietnam. The New York transit strike ended after 3 weeks, and the transit labor leader died in jail of a heart attack. January 30, the East Coast was hit by severe blizzards. 7 inches of snow fell on the city, with winds up to 50 miles an hour. The city of New York offered warm rooms and meals for people living in tenements without heat. JFK Airport was closed, as were train lines and roadways into the city. For the second time within 8 days, a state of emergency was declared because of snow. As a lone individual, Srila Prabhupada could not do anything about the snow emergency or the international warfare. He saw these as mere symptoms of the age of Kali. Always there would be misery in the material world, but if he could bring Radha and Krishna to a building in New York, nothing was impossible for the Supreme Lord. Even in the midst of Kali Yuga, a golden age could appear and people could get relief. If Americans could take to Krishna consciousness, the whole world would follow. Seeing through the eyes of the scriptures, Srila Prabhupada pushed on through the blizzard and pursued the thin trail for support of his Krishna consciousness mission. February 4. He wrote again to Tirtha Maharaj, who had agreed to try for the government sanction if he first received written confirmation from a responsible donor pledging the funds for a temple. Prabhupada informed him that the donor would be Sir Padampat Singhania, and he enclosed Mr. Singhania's favorable letter of the 14th. Prabhupada reminded his god brother. Srila Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta wanted such temples in foreign cities like New York, London, Tokyo, etc. And I had personal talks with him when I first met him at Ulta Danga in 1922. Now here is a chance for me to carry out his transcendental order. I am just seeking your favor and mercy in making this attempt successful. February 5. Discouragement came to the plans Srila Prabhupada had formed around the promise of support by Padampat Singhania. The Dwarakawala wrote to express his dissatisfaction with the 72nd Street building. I am afraid that I cannot agree with your suggestion that you should buy a small house and erect something on top of it. Unfortunately, such a kind of proposal will not suit me. The temple must be a small one, but it must be constructed properly. I quote, I quite agree that you cannot spend a lot of money at present, but within the amount the government may sanction, you should build something according to the architecture of Indian temple. Then only will we be able to create some impression on the American people. This is all I can write to you in this connection. I am very grateful for your taking the trouble of writing me. Prabhupada did not take this letter as final. He maintained hope that Sir Padampat Singhania would still give money for the temple if only the transfer of money could be arranged. He continued writing his godbrothers and other devotees asking them to try to secure the government's sanction. He maintained his same aspirations even though his sole prospective donor had rejected his scheme of a chakra and a dome atop a conventional two-storied building. February 15. He moved from the room 501 downstairs 2 floors to a room all his own. I have changed my room to room 307 in the same building as mentioned above for better air and light. It is on the roadside junction of two roads, the Columbus Avenue and 72nd Street. According to Dr. Mishra, Prabhupada moved in order to have his own place, independent of Mishra Yoga Society. February 16, Prabhupada wrote to the proprietors of the Universal Book House of Bombay, giving some hints for selling his Srimad Bhagavatam in Bombay area. He explained that he was trying to establish a Radha Krishna temple and that a big industrialist of India has promised to pay for the cost. Since it seemed that he might stay in the United States for many more days, he wanted the book house to take increased charge of selling his books throughout India. They were his agent for selling his books in Maharashtra, but now he recommended they take the responsibility in all provinces and introduce his books in colleges and universities throughout India. He also requested that they credit his bank account there for the books sold so far. February 26. Mr. A.P. Dharwadkar of the Universal Book House replied, I cannot give you very happy news on the progress of the sale of Srimad Bhagavatam because the subject is religious and only a small section of society may personally be interested in these books. We tried to push them through some booksellers to Nagpur, Ahmedabad, Pune, etc. But regret to inform you that after some time, these booksellers return the books for want of response. As such, we are not only unenthusiastic to agree to your proposal of taking up sales for all India, but we were thinking of requesting you to nominate some other people in our place to represent your sale program in Maharashtra. So far, they had sold only 6 sets of his books, for which they were about to transfer rupees 172 to his account. This was hardly encouraging to the author. Again, India was not interested. Even in the land of religion, religious subjects were only for a small section of society. March 4. Another reverse. On February 8, Srila Prabhupada had written to India's new Prime Minister Indira Gandhi requesting her to sanction the release of money from India. A reply dated February 25, New Delhi, came from the Prime Minister's official secretary, Mr. L.K. Gha. Dear Swamiji, the Prime Minister has seen your letter of February 8, 1966. She appreciates the spirit which prompted you to carry the spiritual message of Srimad Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam to other countries. Owing to the critical foreign exchange situation which the country is facing, it is greatly regretted that it will not be possible to assist you from here in your plan to set up a Radha Krishna temple. But Prabhupada had other hopes. After writing to the Prime Minister, he had written again to Tirtha Maharaj asking him to request Dr. Radhakrishnan to persuade the government to sanction the release of funds. He waited for 1 month, no answer. Apparently, his godbrothers felt little obligation toward preaching in America. He had written that he needed encouragement from them to continue in America because it was so expensive. He had explained that he was spending the equivalent of 1000 rupees a month. As such, I am counting every day to receive your favorable replies. But there was no reply. Here, March 18, he wrote again to Sir Padampat Singhania requesting him to send a man from India to supervise work on the temple in New York, as Mr. Singhania had previously suggested. There is no record of any reply to this request. Prabhupada wrote again to Sumati Morarji requesting her to please send him a mridanga to accompany his chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. He also requested her that in the future, when he would send many men from India, she obliged by giving them free passage on Scindia steamship lines. No reply. As his financial situation became more urgent and his hopes more strained, his support from India withdrew in silence. His unanswered correspondence was itself a kind of message, loud and clear. We cannot help you. Although no one encouraged him, Srila Prabhupada trusted in the order of his spiritual master and the will of Krishna. The word from the Prime Minister regarding government sanction had been a definite no, but he had received another extension of his visa. Now his last hope was Sir Padampat Singhania. Prabhupada knew that he was so influential a man in India that if he wanted, he could send the money. He was Prabhupada's final hope. April 2. Mr. Singhania did not reply personally. He had his secretary, Mr. Ishwara Iyer, write to Prabhupada, thoroughly discouraging his last hopes for purchasing a building in New York. I regret to write that Sir Padampatji is not interested in the scheme of building a Radhakrishna temple in New York at present. In regard to the inquiry contained in the last paragraph of your letter, Sir Padampatji duly received your books of Srimad Bhagavatam from your Delhi office. You are faithfully. Seeing him from a distance, a tiny figure walking Manhattan streets and avenues among many other tiny figures, a foreigner whose visa had almost run out, we come upon only the external appearance of Srila Prabhupada. These days of struggle were real enough and very difficult, but his transcendental consciousness was always predominant. He was not living in Manhattan consciousness, but was absorbed in dependence upon Krishna, just as when on the Jaladuta he had suffered his heart attacks. His reading of Chaitanya Charitamrita had supplied him the nectarian of life. He had already succeeded. Certainly, he wanted to provide Radha and Krishna a temple in New York, but his success was that he was remembering Krishna even in New York City in the winter of 1965-66, whether the world recognized him or not. Not a day went by when he did not work on Krishna's book, Srimad Bhagavatam. And not a day went by when he did not offer food to Krishna and speak on Krishna's philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, "For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost to him, and he is never lost to me." And Krishna assures his pure devotees that my devotee will never be vanquished. There was never any doubt about this for Prabhupada. The only question was whether Americans would take notice of the pure devotee in their midst. At this point, it seemed that no one was going to take him seriously. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. His Holiness Satsvarup Maharaj ki jai. Prabhupada-līlāmṛta ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji, for the wonderful chapter. At least in this chapter, we thought some positive hope will be there, but still, Prabhupada was positive in all negative situations and so much confident on Krishna. By following the Bhagavad verse, he believed, and so inspiring.
Yeah. What is Sudhir Prabhu saying? He's there? Did he hear? He's around or not there?
I am there, Prabhuji, but not.
He is in office work.
Acha. Okay. Yeah. Life is like that, huh? Lot of difficulties, lot of difficulties.
Yes,
Yeah.
Prabhu.
So the more we hear about Prabhupada and his, yeah, we can go back to those moments where Prabhupada was very highly respected, given all facilities, yeah, in Vrindavan, so that he can always engage in the service, personal service of Shri Radha Damodarji, yeah. But Prabhupada, out of compassion for the well-being of everyone in all over the world, to fulfill his spiritual master's vision come true. Yeah. In one way, we can see this as his guru's instruction or order that Prabhupada has very sincerely served. But we can also see that it's not just the order, but it is to please his guru. It's not a duty. It's not only on a duty basis Prabhupada is doing all this, but it is that he sees that it gives immense pleasure to the spiritual master. So we also have to see how we can please our spiritual master. Uh, make sure that our conversations, our interactions are not casual, and we pray every day, yeah, to the spiritual master, so that we also get strength, yeah, because we have so many things in our life that we can very easily forget the main thing in our life. Yeah, isn't it? Adirasa Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhuji. Correct.
Hmm. So when at least daily, if you don't meditate on this principle of serving Prabhupada, serving our spiritual master, then what may happen is that yeah, uh, we 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 may think, this is also we have come across so many great things in our life, but somehow because we didn't keep it very serious, we just dropped them. But this is our opportunity that we can, yeah, we got the best gift, priceless gift, and in the form of acceptance of spiritual master, shelter. So the more we can meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord and his devotees, spiritual master, that gives us hope, that gives us confidence, that gives us the courage to dream big like Prabhupada has done. And again, we don't want to imitate what Prabhupada did. We want to follow him. What is that is to our capacities, take the words of spiritual master very seriously, apply them in our life, follow and please spiritual master. I mean, I would see this here. And of course, as part of this, because the words of spiritual master and Krishna's are non-different, because that the interests of the Lord and the interest of his devotees are the same. So in that way, when we engage in service of the spiritual master, we are also engaging in the service of the Lord. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone want to share anything? Okay. If not, then yeah, thank you very much. It was once again a very nice day, nice evening. Yeah. To hear the greatness of Prabhupada. Once again, it was almost like it's a starving condition in a very tough weather conditions, tough facilities wise. But Prabhupada stood like a anchor, the boat that cannot be moved by any wind, any storm, any weather. He is in US and he will do something definitely to please his spiritual master. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. His Holiness Satsa Swarupa Maharaj ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.